A few weeks ago I already covered Nikon's new and surprising 35mm 1.4Z lens on this channel here. Basically the contrast to the optically perfect modern lens. A lens with a look, with character and charm. Now there's a new addition to this series. It's this one, the Nikon 50mm 1.4Z. And today we will take a closer look at it. I'm David, you are watching The Vision, and let's go. Unlike the 35 1.4Z, the 50 1.4Z is not cheaper than the 50 1.8 from the S series. Both cost roughly the same, around 550 euros. However, the 1.8 comes from Nikon's S line, which describes the higher quality lenses, similar to Canon's L lenses or Sony's G Master brand. It's a bit slower, but likely optically better. Unfortunately, I can't directly compare these two lenses, but let's take a look at the specs of the new one. And here the two lenses are again remarkably similar. Both are 86mm long, have a diameter of about 75mm and a 62mm filter thread with a weight of around 420 grams. Both are pleasantly compact prime lenses that won't feel bulky on your camera. Both lenses have a sealed design, including a rubber gasket around the mount. They can also handle a bit of dust and splashes, at least when using a front filter. There are only a few controls on these lenses. The 1.8S has a large metal focus ring like the 35 1.8S and an AF/MF switch. Unfortunately, the 1.4 lens lacks this AF/MF switch, but instead it features a rubberized focus ring, which is much more pleasant to use compared to the metal ones in the S series. There's also a control ring on this lens that can be programmed in camera as an aperture ring, but sadly it doesn't have any clicks. The optical construction of the 50 1.4 is much simpler than the one of the 1.8S. It uses only 10 elements in 7 groups instead of 12 elements in 9 groups. However, what the 1.4 lacks according to the description is the nano crystal coating on the glass, meaning the lens elements are not that well coated. Both lenses feature a 9-bladed rounded aperture. The minimum focusing distance is also the same roughly for both, about 40 centimeters, with the 1.4 being slightly better. Optically, there's not much difference compared to the 35 1.4Z. Wide open, the sharpness is not great. You can see this even at 24 megapixels when you look closely. And it doesn't look any better in the sharpness tests with pixel shift enabled. The lens is very soft in the center, smudging structures and contrast, and only starts showing appealing sharpness at f2.8 or f4. It was similar with the 35mm, and I suspect the 50mm 1.8S would perform better in this way. The poor sharpness isn't only noticeable in tests, but also in everyday subjects, if you're shooting wide open. However, in some cases, it isn't necessarily a bad thing, as it gives the lens a certain retro and vintage charm that many modern lenses optimized for perfection doesn't have. If you want this look, you typically need to resort to adapted vintage glass or something like Voigtländer, which lacks the autofocus. Regarding chromatic aberrations, the 35 1.4 still more or less impressed me in this field, but the 50mm doesn't at all. Contrast edges with glow in color. Not so nice. And this is even viewable at f2.8. That's really, really bad. However, lateral CIAs can be manually corrected quite well using Lightroom or any other raw processing software. Longitudinal CAs, shortly LOCA, are pretty nasty with this lens, with the foreground glowing magenta and the background blur turning strongly green. Even without zooming in, this is very distracting. At f2.0 there's still too much for me, and even at f2.8 it's still an issue, but more tolerable then. But you don't have a 1.4 lens to stop it down to 2.8. What really shines, at least in my test setup, through is the bokeh. It offers a smooth, clean bokeh circle, but the glowing edges reveal the CA issues again. Otherwise it's top notch. No onion rings and barely any cat's eye in the corners, even at bright f1.4 aperture. But it gets way worse in practice. The lens again produces a bokeh heavy image look that you either want or don't. The background blur often feels restless and playful. Again, that are characteristics that speak more for retro vintage lenses. Of course, you can also get nice subject isolation at 50mm 1.4, but I'm not really a fan of the bokeh here. For example, these light sources in the background. I don't like it, because in many shots the background becomes the point that you are looking at and not the subject itself, with the attention being drawn to the restless background blur instead of the subject you want to isolate. At this point, the fact that distortion is virtually non-existent doesn't really matter here. That's great for 50mm and how it should be, but nothing that shines out here for me. Vignetting on the other hand is very pronounced at wide open aperture and quite strong. Maybe a little bit too strong for my taste, but at f2.0 it's totally fine again. What isn't fine, however, is the poor ghosting resistance. Once again giving off the vintage lens vibe. There are strong ghostings when light sources directly in the frame. Not only in form of refractions, but also this purple haze around the light source. But flares from the side when the light strikes from the side of the lens are okay too. What really impressed me here is the autofocus, something that vintage lenses aren't good at because they normally don't have it. With this lens you won't hear the autofocus in practice, but if you provoke a fast switch between close and distant focusing, it becomes audible. I was also impressed with its accuracy. Even with running children approaching the camera, it tracked and hit the focus reliably even at 20 frames per second. For video, the 50mm here is actually a bit better suited than the 35mm because it appears to have no focus briefing at all, or at least so little that it's barely noticeable in my tests. The video autofocus also works almost perfectly nice and I really like it. However, in the end, this isn't a lens I would buy for myself. It's not really bad, but in some it's not good either. Sharpness isn't even the issue here, but it has too much character for me. With so restless bokeh, so heavy CAs in every form, and it has not enough reasons to prefer it over the 1.8S, even though I haven't tested that one yet. I think the 1.8S is clearly the better choice for the same money. The Nikon 1.4 Z reminds me a lot of the Viltrox 50mm 1.8 for the Z mount. The new Nikon isn't much better optically. Sharpness, CAs, bokeh and so on. But the Nikon costs 2.5 times more for the maybe better autofocus. If you want a 50mm that gives you a little vintage vibe, I would personally go for the Viltrox lens, even though I don't dislike the idea of a modern vintage lens. But let me know what you think. Would this lens be something for you, or what would you go for? Write it in the comments down below under the video. If you think the Nikon 50mm 1.4 Z is for you, you can find links to it under the video in the video description, and if you purchased through these links, you support this channel at no cost to you, helping me to continue to create such videos. If you liked this review video, remember to like, subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't already, so you don't miss any future videos. Here are 2 more that you can watch when you have more time left. And that's it for today from Division, and see you next time. Bye.